the stakeholders to have a look at the Mazars report, and we sent out the CFI just to kind of frame the discussion or kind of get your thoughts back on it as well. So it took us a few attempts to get a date that suited. So thankfully we're pushing ahead this evening. And we just want to allow, I suppose, the PPN stakeholders, yourselves, just to have the opportunity to discuss the findings. And what we've done as well is kind of plotted a potential way forward, and again, to provide you with that information this evening. We had hoped that Mazars would be able to join us this evening, but unfortunately they're not able to attend. So instead, the department will be given the presentation ourselves in respect of the Mazars report, then going into the process to date, and kind of the next steps in terms of how we propose to kind of finalise the roadmap for the structures of the PPNs. So I just want to, that caveat, we will endeavour to answer as many questions as people have in respect to the Mazars report. We mightn't be able to give you all the answers this evening, but we will take them with us, and we will respond to any questions that we aren't able to answer as a department here this evening. So we are anticipating that the webinar, we're going to run it for approximately an hour. As I mentioned, it will be recorded, and access will be available afterwards. And also, if anybody wants to put any comments or questions in the in the chat, we'll take them away. And again, as I said, we will endeavour to answer all of them. Our communications team will upload the recording onto the website, and we'll let people know then as soon as it's up there. So, as I said, the format for this evening will be a presentation from Elaine and Aoife on the process so far, information on the implementation road map and that working group, and an initial overview, I suppose, of the responses that we received from the call for input, which we issued back in June. And after this, we intend to open the floor for discussion. And during the discussion session, look, I'd ask everybody to put up the hand, and Alan and Gillian are going to be having a look, and we'll hopefully come to everybody in turn. And as I said, the comment section or the chat section is open, so you feel free to use that as well to submit your contribution. Look, we'll do our best to facilitate as many people as possible to contribute. But also just to reassure people that this is not your only opportunity to contribute into this process. We'll have the session at the conference next week, and then there'll be a number of stakeholder consultations as we go forward with the development of the roadmap. So again, there'll be a number of opportunities for people to have their voices heard. So as I mentioned just there, we will have the session, a workshop session at the PPN conference in Laois next week. And again, really important that we capture your feedback, and that feedback is incorporated into how we move forward. And we hope that the final report that goes to the Minister will be representative of as many views as possible. So for this evening, the chat, as I mentioned, the chat function will also be open. But before we begin, I just want to stress one point, and hopefully people are already aware of this, but just in case you aren't, I just want to stress that the recommendations that were made in the Mazars report in terms of structural review are all up for discussion. Nothing has been decided at this point. None of those recommendations have been accepted, and really it's just, I suppose, the starting point to open the discussion in terms of how we develop the roadmap going forward. I think it's also worth saying before we start the presentation that I hope we are all here with the same objective. Certainly from the department's point of view, we really want to put the structural supports in place that help the growth of the PPNs, help all PPN stakeholders to work and to do what they're supposed to do as efficiently and as easy as possible. bearing in mind that the majority of the stakeholders in the PPNs are volunteers. And again, we don't want to be putting in place a structure that adds to that burden. We want to put in place a structure that assists you in all of your roles. We really do believe, I suppose, in the objectives that were set in the 2014 working group. And we want strong, efficient structures in place that enable the PPNs to fulfil their objectives. And hopefully we all have that common objective as we move forward. I'd now like to hand you over, before I do, hand you over to Aoife and Elaine. Everybody is muted. Everybody will be muted. And then as you raise your hand and you're called upon, your button will be unmuted. So bear with us. We'll try and get through everybody and give everybody the opportunity to contribute. I would now like to hand over to Aoife and Elaine to begin the presentation. And Elaine, I think you're going to start by reminding us of the background of the project. So I'll hand over to Elaine and Aoife. Thanks a million, guys.
Thanks, Ciara. Thanks, Ciara. I hope everybody can see these slides. Grant, getting a couple of thumbs up there. So that's always a good sign. So welcome everybody. And we're just going to get into a bit of detail about the structural review itself and about where things are going from here. So just to start off with a bit of a recap on where the structural review came from in the first place, on the background to it. So PPNs had been around for about 5 or 6 years when we decided to do this review. It was a good time to sort of just sit back and take stock of how things were going really with the PPNs. And that was really where this came from. It was taking stock of were the structures and the way things were organized, were they working for the PPNs, or were they doing the job that they were meant to do? So we brought in Mazars to take a look at the PPNs and the structures that are in place and make recommendations. And the idea is that those recommendations, as Ciara was saying, they form a starting point for possible changes and possible adjustments to how PPNs work to make them work more effectively. So the aims of the review starting out were to consider the operation of the PPN network to date, to identify opportunities for further strengthening PPNs, to make recommendations for their future development, to consider the impact of supports that are provided to PPNs by ourselves, by the local authorities, and by other sources to make sure that PPNs can fulfill their purpose effectively. Because ultimately this is all in aid of providing community groups with the means to effectively and meaningfully input into local decision-making processes. So this is the list of objectives that were given to Mazars to begin with, and this sort of formed the starting point to their review. So the methods they used involved, first of all, a piece of desk research on reports and the handbook, things that had already been published. The annual reports in particular, as well as material that had been sent in by PPNs and by others who were involved in PPNs. They sent in material and reports and different publications that they thought Mazars should really be aware of and should take into account. And then it was also important to us that everybody who wanted to had the opportunity to have their say as part of this review. So there was an extensive consultation involved in this process. I'm sure most of you are familiar with it, but just again to recap, there was a survey to begin with, and we had 665 people who responded to the survey. There were a series of, I think, 12 focus groups, and there were 206 people who participated in those focus groups in total. And there were 34 written submissions that were written as group submissions, so written collectively. So bearing in mind, there were a few repeat people between the surveys and the focus group, but we think it's safe to say that something in excess of 700 people had the opportunity to input to this. So it's a huge number, really. And we were delighted to see that people were that enthusiastic about having their say and trying to strengthen PPNs. So after all of that, what did Mazars come up with? We're just going to go through some of the recommendations that came out in their report, which was published at the beginning of the summer. They did begin with an overview of some of the strengths of PPNs. So just to recap on some of the strengths that they outlined, the PPNs provide communities with access to decision makers and They make those kind of links possible between community groups and the decision makers. They allow a diverse range of voices and interests to be brought to the fore and brought into the policy making. Sorry, I muted myself by accident. They create strong relationships between stakeholders at local level. They deliver ongoing communication and engagement in all kinds of settings, face-to-face meetings and virtual engagement between the PPNs and community groups. They foster the commitment and dedication of staff and representatives to their work and their roles. And the commitment and dedication of volunteers is especially commendable. This is people giving up their free time, people who already give up their free time for their communities, giving up more free time in some cases to make sure that the community sector has a voice in local policy making. So there's a lot of positives going in to start with PPNs, and these are things we want to maintain as we move forward. In terms of the recommendations, again, a lot of you will be familiar with this, but a bit of a whistle-stop tour. And we do want to emphasize again that these recommendations are not binding, and they're not necessarily the only things that are going to be on the table as we move forward, but they do form our starting point. So to quickly go through what they are, the first thing that was recommended was to take a back to basics approach and prioritize really taking action and taking quick action. One of the things that had come up as a finding was that sometimes it was slow to make things change and to move things forward. So that's something we're taking on board. There was a recommendation to clarify some of the mandatory requirements, communicate things more clearly, and to more proactively address cases where maybe parties weren't really complying with what was required of them. Reviewing the structures to make sure that PPN independence was maintained, and to establish trust and respect to make collective action possible. So those recommendations really take account of some of the PPN principles, the independence and the respect and so on. Under the heading of communications and engagement, Mazars has recommended introducing a PPN-wide communication structure to improve the visibility of the PPNs, to simplify some of the roles and responsibilities, to provide clearer descriptions for stakeholders, and in general to make things a bit more approachable for people, particularly new people joining the PPNs. They also recommended taking advantage of what we've all learned to do during COVID and work in a hybrid manner, and use flexible models for engaging with each other. So I suppose just to mention that in terms of increasing the visibility of the PPNs, it's something we're already working on. We have a communications campaign that's being developed at the moment. If you're curious about it, you can ask your representatives on the communications subgroup about the progress that's being made there. And the roles and responsibilities, this is something that did come up very, very strongly in the written feedback that we received over the summer. So there's a lot of agreement there between the Mazars recommendations and yourselves in the PPNs and the local authorities. Coordination and participation, Mazars recommended minimising the barriers to participation that are experienced by people and trying to achieve a greater sense of partnership. Strengthening the relationships and communication and engagement between PPNs and all stakeholders, and introducing a PPN-wide coordination structure. For the last one, Mazars proposed 3 different models of how such a coordination structure might work. So that was Mazars' creation, not ours. So we won't get into the ins and outs of it here, but just to note and to make it clear to everyone that we did get a lot of feedback on this whole idea of a national coordination structure as part of the written feedback. So we will be guided by that written feedback that we received ourselves and the working group. In terms of how we're discussing this when we're moving forward, we'll be looking primarily really at what we got from yourselves in the written feedback. So it really is going to be taken on board when we discuss whether or not to introduce such a national structure, what people might want from a national structure if it's implemented. So as I said, things are kind of still open at this stage. But just to clarify that there was a lot of feedback on that, and we will be taking it on board very strongly. Under training, delivery and supports, Mazars recommended delivering a PPN way of addressing and delivering the roles and in a sort of very linked objective, adopting a one and done approach to activities to avoid duplication, unnecessary duplication across the PPNs. And another one was to clarify the expectations of PPNs and provide necessary support to address issues of national importance. So there's sort of two recommendations in one there, clarifying expectations, and then PPNs are getting involved in a little bit of consultation on national policy lately, so to maybe address how best to go about that was the aim of that recommendation. And then finally, the final area that Mazars looked at was staffing and skills. So they recommended clarifying the staff requirements and addressing the gaps maybe in skills that might arise. So that's a sort of two-parter. First, to clarify what's required, and then second, to see what gaps might be there and to fill those gaps in. They recommended further consideration of employee terms and conditions for PPN staff and providing more proactive and coordinated HR support. So a lot of moving parts to that one, but again, that was something that people felt very strongly about in the written submissions, and Aoife will go into more detail on that in a few moments. So that's sort of where we've come from with the review that was carried out last year. So just to go into where we are in the whole process. So we have published the report. That was step one. We carried out an initial, just a very initial consultation with everyone over the summer to get a sort of a first reaction to the report. And we've also established a working group with representatives of various stakeholder groups. Aoife will go into that a little bit as well. So where we are now is we're at the stage of developing a roadmap of PPN's future, what the future is going to look like for the PPNs, using the report and the recommendations as a jumping off point for discussion. So we're conscious of the principle of nothing about us without us. So where we feel that we need more detail, or we really need to get our hands around what it is the PPNs want as we move through developing that roadmap, we will be going back to stakeholders to make sure that we're getting it right. We will be drafting the roadmap and putting that out to consultation as well. But while we do have your written feedback, in many cases, some of the feedback can be quite general, and ourselves in the working group will have to deal maybe with some of the nitty-gritty details that haven't already been anticipated. So we may sort of go back to the PPNs at some point while we're developing this process to just try and tease out some of those nitty-gritty details to make sure that we're getting it right, that we're not second guessing what people want out of the future structures, because it is really important to get this right. So where it's needed, we will be looking at some sort of further dialogue with yourselves. And again, where it's appropriate, we may look into sort of things like co-design processes and very, very involved, a very, very thorough engagement involving the people who are going to be affected by the structures that we're putting in place. So that's sort of a view of where we're coming from and what the overall process looks like. I'm going to hand over to Aoife now just to go through where we are now and where we're going next.
Thanks very much, Elaine. I hope everyone can hear me. So I'm going to speak just about where we are in the roadmap process and maybe give a flavour of some of the calls for input, the responses that we received over the summer. So to start off on the roadmap of PPN's future development, as Elaine has said and Ciara has said too, the Mazars report put forward recommendations aimed at improving PPN structures and addressing some of the challenges that they identified. These are very much, to say it again, a starting point for the discussion as we move forward. We aim to work with stakeholders on a collaborative basis to develop an implementation roadmap that sets out actions aimed at addressing any changes to structures that are needed to enable the PPNs to function most effectively. I'm sorry, can everyone hear me? I just saw a message there that there was someone was having difficulty. It's okay? Okay. So yes, so sorry, just saying we will work on a collaborative basis and we are taking into account the feedback that we got on Mazars recommendations. But just to say that the process won't be limited to the recommendations made in Mazar's report. It will take into account the feedback that you all provided in the call for input responses, but we're also open to any new ideas that you may have and that the working group may develop during the course of their discussions. So on to the working group. As you're probably already all aware, the working group has been set up to oversee the development and the implementation of the roadmap of future actions. The members of the group come from as wide a range of PPN stakeholders as we could get. We have representatives from the resource worker and secretariat networks, from the 3 pillars, the CCMA, the Department of Health, the Department of Housing, Local Government and Heritage, the Department of Children, Equality, Disability, Integration and Youth, Corlean and Og, and PPN representatives elected to local authority boards or committees. We had the first meeting of the group on the 6th of September. There were 14 members there, and there was a really great level of engagement and energy at the meeting. We have given them a bit of homework to do. The group members have been asked to consider and agree on proposals for how the overall project should take place. And we hope to hold the second meeting of the group in early November. We're currently drawing up a draft project plan to guide the work, which we'll be bringing to the next meeting of the group for their input and for their consideration. So I thought it might be useful just to clarify a little bit about what we're talking about when we refer to the roadmap. So when the working group have agreed the way forward, for example, any changes needed or areas of good practice which should be rolled out across all PPMs, the roadmap document will signpost the actions that are required to deliver on those areas. It will also identify who will be responsible for delivering the actions to encourage people to take ownership, and it will set out a broad timescale for the delivery of the actions. The overall aim of the roadmap, so its destination, is very much to best enable the PPNs to fulfil the objectives set out for them in the 2014 report that Ciara mentioned earlier on citizen engagement with local government. So the next major milestones for the working group, once the group has agreed the overall way forward and agreed the project plan, the next major milestone will be to develop the draft implementation roadmap. Just to emphasize again that the group and ourselves will be working on a consultative basis with stakeholders to develop that roadmap. The working group will develop the document using Mazar's recommendations as the starting point, incorporating all the feedback from stakeholders and including any additional areas for action that they might identify during the course of their discussions, but also with stakeholder advice and input. So from their representative groups, from yourselves. Once the draft has been agreed by the group, it will be circulated among the stakeholders for their views, and these will inform the development of the final draft. So just to say again what Elaine was saying earlier, in developing that draft, there may be consultation on specific aspects as we try to work out the nitty-gritty details, but once the final the draft document has been pulled together, that will be circulated as well for feedback. Once the final draft roadmap has been signed off by the group, it then goes to the Minister for his consideration and for the final decision. So just to look at some frequently asked questions and some things that have come up already internally. So on the actions that the plan will contain, nothing is decided yet. All of those will be decided by the working group. Could be that some of them will be recommendations from the Mazar's report or based on those, as Elaine was saying, as a jumping off point, and then some new actions on who will carry out the implementation work. That again will be decided by the working group and will probably vary from action to action depending on the most appropriate person. The roadmap will assign responsibility for each action though, so that it's clear and so that everyone knows who owns what. And then on the overseeing of the implementation of actions, be very much the responsibility of the working group and ourselves in the department. So we thought it would be useful to give a flavour of an initial flavour of some of the responses to the call for written input. So as you know, the call for input went out at the beginning of July and all key stakeholders, groups and organisations were asked to provide a written response to the report. It was a really good response. We were really pleased that so many people were able to feed in. We had 46 submissions in all, 26 PPNs submitted a written response, 13 local authorities. We had responses from the resource worker and the secretariat networks, from the environmental pillar, from Social Justice Ireland, and from a number of other groups and individuals. Sheets mixed up. So the responses will help us to identify the key priorities and the areas of consensus across PPN stakeholders. We're still working on collating the information from the responses, and we're working to identify common themes, priority recommendations, and areas of concern. All of the submissions are going to be shared with the implementation working group, and they will be taken into account in developing the roadmap. We see them very much as a bank of information for the group to draw on and to refer to during their discussions. We also plan to publish the submissions on the website so that they're available to all who might wish to read them. That was an idea that the Secretariat Network put forward, and we were really happy to take up that suggestion. We're just in the process at the moment of seeking permission to publish from all those who returned responses. But as soon as we have the go-ahead, we will put them up on the website, and we'll let you know as soon as they're available. We'll circulate the link. We'll also, as Elaine and Ciara said, we'll be sharing more detail about the responses to the call for input during our workshop at the PPN National Conference next Friday. So there'll be another chance to discuss there and to input. For today, we thought it would be useful just to give an overall view of the responses. As you can imagine, there were a variety of views on the Mazars report. Some felt that it was a comprehensive report and it reflected the breadth of issues on PPNs well, but others felt that it very much emphasised the negatives and failed to reflect on the positive aspects of the PPN structures. Didn't reflect all of the excellent work that PPNs are doing and the good working relationships that do exist in the sector. Some felt that the report only addressed the internal functioning of the PPNs without taking into account the external elements which can impact on the PPN's effectiveness. There was a feeling in some responses that the reviewers didn't completely understand the PPNs, particularly the flat structure and the reason why the flat structure is so important. And some of the responses felt that the report wasn't clear enough and that it didn't set out the reasons behind the recommendations that are being made. But just to give then the major themes that we've identified so far and the things that were reflected in most of the PPN, the stakeholder submissions. So these are the areas of common interest identified in most. The first is staffing and resources. Responses often expressed a desire for standardised staff terms and conditions across all PPNs and for more funding to be provided to PPNs, particularly in the current economic circumstances. The second area was roles and responsibilities. There was a feeling that roles and responsibilities needed to be clear to all involved, and that currently the boundaries and the responsibilities of different roles aren't communicated clearly enough. The third area was the organisational structure. Many responses referred to the need to retain the involvement of the 3 colleges and of the secretariats, and I will come back to the secretariats in just a minute. And the last major theme arising in the responses was communication and messaging, with many emphasising the need for greater awareness of PPNs and more knowledge sharing. And as Elaine referred to earlier, we are hoping that the communication strategy will help with that. So we're glad that we already have work underway that might address some of those concerns. So just to go back to the secretariats for a minute, we thought it would be important to clarify one area that has come up a number of times, both in the call for input responses and in other channels. We've heard very clearly that stakeholders are concerned about the role of the Secretariat, and they're concerned that Mazars' report suggests that the Secretariat should be abolished. This is very much not the case. I think there should be, the quote from the report should be coming up on the slide there. As you know, Mazars recommended putting a national structure in place to coordinate the work of the PPNs. And in that context, they recommended giving the role of the Secretariat more consideration, as they thought that having a national PPN coordination structure could impact on the role of the secretariats. As Elaine has already said, and as Ciara has said, and as I have said as well, Mazur's report is very much the starting point for the discussions. No commitments have been made. All the options are still on the table for discussion. So as I said before, the working group will be looking at all of these areas in more detail. They'll be guided by the feedback and by the input from yourselves, the stakeholders. The working group may decide to analyse the Secretariat role in more detail. For example, as the question just says there, if the feedback from stakeholders is that elements of the Secretariat role are difficult for volunteers and maybe need more supports or better definition, then it might be useful to analyse the Secretariat role to get at those nitty-gritty details, as Elaine was saying. But just to reiterate before I finish, there is no intention of abolishing the Secretariats. Yeah, sorry, that's me. I hand back to Ciara and we can start the discussion.
Thanks very much, Elaine and Aoife. I suppose we don't want to monopolise the conversation here this evening. It's about your participation and your engagement as well. But just wanted to comment very quickly on some of the comments that have been put up on the chat already, and it's very clearly coming across that there are frustrations out there at the moment. And I suppose what we're trying to do as part of this process is to put structures in place, remove some of those frustrations. So very much here, and I think they're covered under some of the areas that were mentioned about the roles, about communications, etc. So just to say, for those of you that don't know, first of all, there was a review of the LCDC structures done by this department, and that report is available on our website. We can circulate it or provide the link if anybody wants it. The second thing, which we're very pleased about, is that the Department of Housing and Local Government have started the process to commence a review on the SPCs. And I know over the years in this role that has been a cause of huge frustration from the PPNs as well. So I'm delighted to say that they've given us a number of spaces on that SPC working group, and I think that's paramount, I suppose, to the engagement of the PPNs. And I think, the opportunity there is to put the PPN voice forward and how the SPC structures work going forward, and how best they can structure themselves to allow for the PPN engagement and feed and for the PPNs to feed into those structures. And again, we will have a departmental representative on that group as well as the PPN representatives. So, we will be supporting through the feedback that we've got on the SPC processes from the PPN over the years as well. I know people have mentioned about the budget allocation for PPNs, and quite disappointed about that. Really, as part of the budget estimates, we pushed very strongly for cost of living increases because we received a lot of correspondence from PPNs in respect of that. I think with the roadmap as well, our aim is that we will have a roadmap in place that sets out a clear plan, a clear structure as to where we see the PPNs going into the future, and that will be a very strong evidence base to for the estimates process going forward, and getting the funding in place to support the delivery of those actions that will allow the PPNs to flourish. So I would see this is a really important tool in equipping ourselves to make those points, to get the funding in place to support the PPNs going forward, and to make sure that we have the funding and the resources available that, I suppose, deliver the vision that we have for the roadmap. So look, I'm going to stop talking now and hand over the floor. There's a number of hands up. So Gillian and Alan, part of our team here. Sorry, I didn't introduce the team at the start. I'm Ciara Bates, I'm the Principal Officer. Aoife O'Brien is the AP, Elaine Jennings is the AO, Gillian is the EO in the section, and Alan is the CO. So we're the PPN team in the department. And look, we hope to meet most of you at the conference next week. So you know what we look like now if you want to have a chat with us. Okay, so I see that Gillian's given me prompts here, so that Sarah Clancy had her hand up there. So Sarah, I'm going to pass over to you.
No, she's still muted.
Sorry. Sorry, I was still muted there. It wasn't my fault, but a moment of silence, probably no harm. I have two questions. One concerns they're kind of questions, but one is I would love to know, in light of the funding and in light of, I suppose, the separation between the different departments and how they deal with the PPNs, I would love to know what the Department of Community and Rural Development's picture of the future of the PPN network is. You know, I know that you're concentrating very hard on that we are co-designing the future, but what I'd like to know is what is it that the department expects the PPNs to be into the future? Because I think I think that just like the PPNs existing is not, we're all doing a lot of work to keep the PPNs existing, but what do we want them to be is the question. And I'd love to have the view from the department on that. And then the second thing is, I think we have, I think we have an issue without, even with everybody working to their full capacity from local government, from the departments and from the PPNs, even if all things being equal and everybody was given 100%, we have an issue of the housing and hosting, right? We really need, I strongly feel this, but we really need input on the National Advisory Group and on the hosting arrangements for the PPNs from the Department of Housing and Local Government. Because if local authorities are responding mostly directly to the Department of Local Government, and the community then is sequestered to respond to the Department of Rural and Community Development, we have two different frameworks. With two different frameworks, and they're not, they're not, like, at one of the earlier discussions when we were talking about that the need for input and leadership from the Department of Local Government around the PPNs, the staff of the Department of Community and Rural Development was saying, oh yes, we can, that we as the PPNs, we can evaluate the local authorities if we want. That's not what we were asking in that particular meeting. What we were asking was, how do we get the Department of Local Government at the table with shared responsibility with the Department of Community and Rural Development for the success and the buy-in to the PPN. So that's a very long speech, but two short questions. What does the department see, and how can we and should we involve the Department of Local Government?
Thanks. Am I still? Can everyone still hear me? Yeah. Sorry. Thanks, Sarah. Again, I think it's important. It's important to note that the PPNs came out of that report on the working group on citizen engagement. And I suppose what the department really wants to do is ensure that that grassroots, that bottom-up approach is reflected in policy development, because the lessons learned over the years is that policy doesn't work unless it has that buy-in and engagement from the community. And as Elaine said, nothing for us without us would really be the vision that we would have in terms of participative democracy and engagement with decision making, policy setting, etc., particularly where it impacts you and your locality and your community, etc. So I suppose what we're looking for here is putting that structure in place that allows that. And I think it's the public participation networks a really good start. Are they perfect? No. And I think where things aren't working, or where we need to tweak things, or where we need to focus our energies is something that the department wants to work with the PPNs to ensure that we get the best outcome for our communities in terms of policy development. That's my answer. The Minister might have a different answer, but as the head of the unit that's responsible for driving this piece, where I would be coming from. And again, we do not want this to be a departmental-led process, because we don't walk in your shoes. We don't have the same issues and concerns and frustrations and barriers that you do as PPN, who are actively engage in the PPN process. So we are that one step removed. So it's very important that you bring us into the reality of the issues that you're dealing with, that we can work together to try and put I suppose, actions in place that address them. The other thing, I 100% agree that Department of Housing and Local Government need to be part of this process. And yeah, it's quite the CCMA do sit at the table, but I think the department needs to be at that table as well. So I just want to check who's next. Gillian, who's next? Mags from Kilkenny. Thanks. Go ahead, Mags.
Is it after coming up there? Yeah. Oh, you can hear me okay now, yeah? Can you hear me? Yep.
Yeah,
okay,
we can
great.
hear you.
Sorry, apologies. Technology, the joys. Yeah, thanks very much, Ciara. It's really it's just, I suppose, a couple of observations really, and maybe we could just discuss it. It's just that I suppose that there has in recent times in particular, and I suppose it adds to the workload of the PPN over the last number of years, is that community development piece. Because, you know, initially, obviously, it was set up purely from a policy development perspective, and rightly so. But I think you can't have one without the other. And I suppose over the last number of years, in the absence of a community development programme, a national community development programme, the PPNs are being pulled more and more into that sphere. Now, I think I'm not giving out about that. I think it's actually very important to the work of the PPN, because it allows us to foster relationships and develop, you know, relationships in the community with a variety of different groups and organisations. So it is very important from that perspective, and then in turn it leads to engagement from a policy perspective. But I suppose from a resource point of view, it is proving strenuous, because the workload associated with that is of a massive content. So it's just to put that out there, because I know it had been bandied about in the past, where it was like, well, you shouldn't be doing community development work, but it kind of is now part of it. You know, it's become, that's the organic aspect of the PPN, I suppose, is that that's the realm we've ended up in. And I think most of my colleagues here around the table would agree, you can't have a good policy development sector without a good community development sector. But in line with that as well, I suppose from a national perspective, we've noticed as well, you know, it almost feels like we're being pitted against the volunteer centres, and it's like, well, we're two horses of two very different colours. You know, the work overlaps. And certainly here in Kilkenny, you know, we were the driving force down here behind the development of the new volunteer centre. We're chair of the board. We have a fabulous relationship with the volunteer centre and assist in some of the work that they do. But I suppose, you know, from a national perspective, even from the minister's point of view, you know, I think it would be really important that the work of the PPN is highlighted in tandem with the work of the volunteer centres. Our reach, I think it's very short-sighted, you know, to think that when you see 400 and something odd individuals registered with the volunteer centre, that's fabulous. But when you see 440 odd members registered with the PPN, your reach is absolutely extensive, because each organisation can have between 20 to 120 to 200, even 300 members. So it's just maybe it's food for thought going forward, that I think we need the minister there, you know, highlighting and showcasing the work of the PPNs from a policy perspective, from a community development perspective. Yes, the work overlaps with the volunteer centres, but we are two very different entities. So it's just to put that out there.
Thanks very much, Mags. And as the PO with responsibility for the volunteer centres as well, we might touch base in respect to that, because we'd be interested in hearing more about that. But very much agree with you around the community development piece, and it's something that we've been looking at as a department, and it's been raised through other forums, the CMV forum as well, that over the years we have lost that grassroots community development piece.
Yeah.
And it's something that we're very much it's on our radar to look at it going forward, because I think policy and development are two very different things, and you know, where it does get muddled up, it gets confusing, and then I suppose you lose direction, etc. So it is something that we are looking at as a department of rural and community development, around that whole community development piece at grassroots level. and we're actually trying to look at a scheme in terms of how we can put those community development workers back on the ground at the moment. But it's not on my side, but it's on Paul Geraghty's side. We are working with him, and we have given that feedback. But look, we might bring the PPNs into that conversation. It's at very early doors at the moment, but certainly we'll bring that in, and we will take that conversation offline in terms of the volunteer centres and PPNs, because we're really interested in hearing how, I suppose, to develop that partnership as opposed to having them, as you said, clashing and working against each other or getting each other's way.
Thanks, Ciara. That's great.
Next on the list is Tony McCarthy.
Yeah, thanks, Ciara. I would echo what Meg said. I think the organisation was originally intended to be bottom up, and I think it should remain so. Having said that, we should be involved in the national programs, and national programs and consultation are making demands on staff, which I think far exceed the capabilities of the staff to do at the moment, in the sense that the amount of consultation work that's taking place and the skills required, they need to be supported. There's a need, I think, for a research officer in each PPN now, because reps will get a mountain of information before meetings, and to get through them, they need somebody to analyze them, recognizing that the reps are volunteers. And I would also go along with what Sarah said, that we got to, one of the things that this report is missing is the role of all the partners. They're strictly gone. And indeed, the talk on finance is also missing. I think that's a fundamental part. But we do need to see where all our partners are involved. But I suppose underlying it all, and this is a very important point, is that we must respect each other.
Thanks very much, Tony, and a very, very important statement to end on there. It is about respect. I think some of the recommendations in the Mazars report did speak around clarifying that roles and what the roles of all the stakeholders are. So very much interested, I suppose, in fleshing that out and seeing what actions we can come up with in respect of that. I think the point around the research officer and the PPNs being seen as the go-to structure for community conversations and community engagement, it has come out very strongly in the last couple of years. I think it's important that our structures that we put in place, whether it's the national coordination piece, etc., allow for that community conversation piece to be brought into the national policy development, and how we best support that in order for that grassroots voice to travel international policy and its coordinated, etc., is an important part of the piece in terms of our roadmap going forward. And again, very much welcome any ideas or potential actions or suggestions in respect of that in respect of that piece. Dermot, I think is next. Dermot Macquarie. Macquarie. I don't know whether I've pronounced your name. Apologies if I haven't, Dermot. Sorry, Dermot, you're just on mute at the moment. Alan, can you unmute Dermot, please?
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. Hello?
Yeah, Dermot, you have the floor, yeah.
Yeah, sorry about that. Dermot Macquarie here. I'm on the SPC in Dún Laoghaire, Rathdown. I'm on the Environment and Climate Change Committee. And thanks for the background. I represent an organisation called Crown Trees for Ireland, and we endeavour to do our bit about providing information about best practice for trees and the environment. But I've 4 points to make. We have 5 representatives on Crown in various SPCs, and we feel as an organisation that there's a dual structure. We attend meetings with councillors, and we feel we are inferior citizens, that there should be equality of contributions. The councillors, I think, are paid an attendance fee. Us poor guys turn up, we give free consultation, we give our time and effort, and what we contribute does not appear in the minutes of the meetings. Now, I'm not sure if that's widespread, but I don't think there should be a dual structure in an organization like the PPN or in the SPC. And that has, I thought the Mazars report would comment on this. We're all equal here. I mean, if we attend a meeting in council chambers and we listen to councillors and we contribute and give extremely good advice as experts on an SPC, I think we should be mentioned in the minutes. I also feel that where the minutes should represent our input, and I find that is not the case in our particular organ. I'm not sure if that's widespread. That's one point. The other is, maybe I'm right or wrong, I think the councillors are paid an attendance fee. We are not. I think that should be looked at. Maybe I'm wrong. You may be looking for answers here. The other thing is, a lot of activities occur in communities attended by councillors. I see ribbon cutting ceremonies. I see councillors on Facebook appearing at all type of events, and our PPN representatives don't even get invited to these events. Again, it would seem that we are second-class citizens. I think that's inappropriate, and I have to mention this. I've mentioned this to some of my colleagues in Crown Trees for Ireland. They do feel that we are not on equal terms. If I go into a meeting, a committee, like this evening, we're all listening to each other, we're participants, there's no egalitarian structure, but I do feel that is something that has not been addressed by Mazars. And those are just a few points. I don't want to be controversial, but I feel we have not addressed these problems. And I'd like to think that if we attend meetings as experts on SPCs, that we should be on equal status. I'm not sure if this is unique to us in Crown Trees for Ireland, but I would like to hear your views. I don't think this is compatible with the objectives of PPN. We should all be equal at the table. Thanks for the background.
Thanks, Dermot. I think it's one of the strong values of the PPNs is that equality piece, and I think maybe one of the things that we should be pushing forward for in the SPC review. I think you've written one of the values for us there, Dermot, in your statement is equality of contribution. I think that's a really important piece, and you're not the first person to raise it, and it has been brought up before. So that's certainly something that we will look to address it as part of our input into the SPC review. To answer your questions about the councillors, I actually don't know, but we'll certainly find out for you. Then I think the clear message that I got as well in terms of the roadmap is we need to have an action that shows that the PPN contribution is valued. I think that value piece is what came out there. So how do we reflect that in terms of the structure and the value of the contribution of the PPN and PPNs, and the member groups, the PPNs, are valued in terms of the contribution. So I hope I've summed that up okay, Dermot. If not, you can send me an email. I'm just going to move on now to the next person, which is Aileen Eglinton. Hi, Aileen.
Hi, Ciara, and hi, everybody. And I have to say, I'm delighted that we were able to do this tonight, because I think the last 2 years we've obviously lost the skill of communication, except on Zoom and all other dreaded things like WebEx. One of the things that I wanted to raise tonight, which I think is really, really important, is I'm on a secretariat, I'm a volunteer. I've always chosen in my life to take the time out to volunteer. And what I've been finding in the PPN at the moment is we're taking an inordinate amount of time to deal with HR issues, all sorts of issues like that. And I see it came up in the Mazars report, but I think it's really, really important in terms of, if we start to look at the structure, that whole idea of a coordinated approach in terms of HR and a pathway, because I know we as a secretariat take our role very, very seriously in taking care of our paid staff. Having said that, we're volunteers. We want to be able to do as much as we can to go back out into the community as the Secretariat, as talking to the reps, as doing all those things. And I feel that our time on secretariats is being taken up far too much with bureaucracy and taking care of things instead of going back out to empower people in the community and also reflect information back in. And I would certainly welcome, as part of this report, the whole idea that we have, you know, a coordinated approach, that we look at the whole area of the hosting, that we have a standard, and that we have experts that we can call on, because I think it is really, really important in the management of volunteer time. And it's good to see you all.
You too. I mean, right insight as always. And look, I couldn't agree more. And I think, you know, I think the role. This is just my view, my observation in terms of what comes in to the department and what comes across our desk, is that secretariats, like you say, Aileen, the whole time is spent up dealing with governance, bureaucracy, problem solving, in terms of interrelationships, as opposed to actually the business of the PPN, and I suppose steering that forward. So I do agree, and I think we need to look at a structure that removes some of that responsibility from the Secretariat, or not even removes it, but provides the appropriate supports to the Secretariats in respect of that. So again, I would be hopeful to see an action in the roadmap that addresses that and teases us out, and I suppose puts the best support structure in place for secretariats. And I know a huge amount of people didn't join secretariats to do that type of work. It was more that community policy development piece. So look, I 100% agree. And I think if we can come up with a really good structure to provide those central or coordinated supports for those specific areas for the secretariats, like I for one would be happy with that as an outcome. So again, welcome any suggestions or thoughts in respect of that. I think I hope that answered the question, Amy. I have Karina up next. Karina Holmes.
Hello, it's Ciara. It's lovely to talk to you and your team this evening. I'm just really, I suppose I'm quite new to the Secretariat.
Sorry, Karina, we've lost you. Has anyone else lost Karina?
Yeah, lost her.
Oh. Maybe, Karina, while you're talking, do you want to turn off your video sometimes? It comes through a bit clearer. Oh.
Can you hear?
We can hear you now, Karina. Yes, much better without the video. So yeah, far ahead.
Apologies about that. No, I'm just make a quick enough point, and but it's lovely to meet you and your team. And I'm quite new to the PPN, but I really feel, just looking at it and coming with, I suppose, a fresh pair of eyes, that the financial piece is really important in terms of structure, in terms of permanency, in terms of giving the staff of the resource staff and support staff just that feeling of security as well. Because I'm just amazed and in awe at what our staff are doing and what they're really going above and beyond. And I just don't feel they have the security or those HR issues that Aileen was talking about, that they're not covered in a way that other people are. And certainly given inflation at the moment, I think, services have to be given at least that amount of money to keep going, because otherwise, they're being cut. In real terms, if you take inflation into account, that's a cut in budget if they're not getting those increases. So it's just to make the structure. And also, one of the key things with you know, setting up groups and that, to make them truly independent, you have to give them a good financial structure that, you know, is independent of county councils. You know, you just can't have that interplay that allows influence. And I think, you know, as other people have said too, the voice at the table needs to be heard and it needs to be acknowledged. So I just tidied it up there because I know time is rolling on, but they're my main points really. And thank you for hosting this. I think it's been really useful.
Thanks a million, Karina. It's always great to get that fresh eye perspective and somebody coming into it. And again, thanks for putting your hands up to volunteer for the PPN. What I took from your comments to feed into the discussion on the structural report is something actually that Aileen referred to as well, is that we have to look at the whole review of that hosting kind of piece and how that impacts on HR management, staff terms and conditions, security, etc. So I hope that's what I've taken down in terms of the structure review. So and then obviously underpinning all of that is the appropriate amount of financial support to enable all of that to happen. So
I think that's really important for the support staff, because so that they can apply for loans, so that they can have, you know, a normal life.
Okay, great. Thanks a million for that, Karina. I'm just conscious of time. Is everybody okay if we just continue? I just want to give everybody the opportunity. The next person with a hand up on my list is Vincent Lyons.
Yeah, thanks everyone. And I suppose rather than rehash everything that has said, especially what Mags has said in terms of the workload and everything, but one of the things that we've started doing, right, and it's taken us a long time to get in the door, is we're actually getting a slot at the municipal district meetings. We've had 2 of them so far, and like from our point of view, like the message that we give to the councillors is we're all working for community. We need to work together. And from that point of view, I think we've opened the door here in County Galway to getting a better relationship with the councillors. Some of the councillors are members of community groups that we have, but we deliberately circulate our monthly newsletter to all the councillors to get them more aware. And the PPN has always been a hard sell, because the bloody name of it is a conundrum in itself. You know, it's not simple like the community forum used to be. You know, public participation network, you know, it even puts people off. So, you know, from that point of view, like we have to put in the work, and like we're fortunate, you know, here in Galway, the relationship is working good, but there are other places where it's not. And the Mazars report didn't recognise that at all. And if the Mazars had not read the 3 annual reports that were put, I think that the report would be very, very short, because they did actually no research out on the PPNs and look at the websites and to see what exactly was happening. So I think, you know, and I'm very disappointed actually that considering that they were paid a fortune, that they're not here tonight.
Thanks, Vincent. For those points. And I think one of the things that we were trying to do as part of the call for input, and also through these discussions, is some of the things that you mentioned there, Vincent, in terms of how you've developed that relationship. You've got your seats at the municipal district councils. I'm thinking if we can capture some of this and look at how we can implement it across other PPNs to improve the relationships with councillors, etc. Any of those ideas or practices that have worked really well in PPNs, how can we scale them? Can we replicate them across the PPN networks? It's part of what we're trying to do as part of this roadmap development as well. So again, welcome inputs, ideas, suggestions in respect of that really good practice that you mentioned there, Vincent. Okay, I'm again, just conscious of time. Jerry Moore, Jerry, you're next on my list.
Yeah, I'm here. Two things really. One, it's a chat. There's a system. I can't remember its exact terminology. Communication system that's being basically very strongly advocated by Mazars. And I'm just wondering how strongly the department is wedded to that particular concept or idea of a system, I suppose. Secondly, I'm a very strong supporter of what was option 3. In other words, a fully separate national operational system, and breaking away from local authority hosting, etc. But I don't quite understand at the moment what way that would be received or is being received. That's it, basically.
Thanks, Jerry. I just didn't catch the first question around the concept of system. Which system?
Oh, no, there's a communication system that's being advocated now. I think it's called Chat, and it's part of a larger system that's been advocated by Mazars. I can't remember the name of it.
Jerry, is it the Salesforce system?
Exactly, yes.
And the
Okay.
chat function there.
Yeah. Sorry, Jerry. That's actually part of the funding. The use of Salesforce is actually part of the funding agreement with the department. And the reason is that instead of there being 29 separate CRM systems, operational systems, IT operational systems across PPNs, economies of scale and all the rest in terms of Salesforce, but it also gives us a single set of data in respect of all the PPNs nationwide as well. And that's why we would use Salesforce and advocate for Salesforce as well. But we've provided a huge amount of training on Salesforce. There's suggestions around Salesforce development in terms of what it can do for PPNs, and there's the opportunity for PPNs every year to put forward suggestions in terms of different tools to be available made through Salesforce. But look, happy to engage with you in respect to Salesforce if you are having issues with it offline, and delighted that you put your view forward around in terms of option 3, because this again is what this process is about, to get the views, what direction you think we should be travelling in. So thanks very much for sharing that, Jerry.
Can I just come back on that one in briefly, that although I know you've invested in Salesforce training, I don't think it's been sufficient, because the attempt to use chat, which I think is part of it, in our own the PPN basically collapsed. Nobody was interested in the slightest. So I think if you're going to advocate it, then you need to sort of offer, I think, a good deal more encouragement and a good deal more explanation as to its purpose. That's it. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Jerry. I think the last person I have on the list here is Kathleen Dowd. Kathleen, I'll hand over to you.
Hi, Ciara. Hi, everyone. Yeah, just like Karina that spoke earlier, I'm actually new to the Longford Secretariat. And I just wanted to say all of this is very new to me, and it was great to be part of the webinars and part of the structural review, looking at the report. But also what I found, and I just thought I felt like adding this in, that as a new person coming into the PPN, I participated in training. And I found it very valuable, and I do think something like that is so good to continue and to enhance further if that can be. And also the fact that there was a longer member of the PPN in Longford attending the training with me, it just helps newer people that are coming in to get their footing and to, you know, just get a touch base with everything. Secondly, I agree with Karina. I think the PPNs need to be funded and need to be resourced more. Siobhan Cronach is our PPN worker in Longford, and it amazes me the amount of work. We're dealing with a very diverse community, and you know, she's stretching herself across the whole county to reach out to everyone. So, but there is need for further resources and funding there to get that work to continue and to get the voices to the table, and that you know what we are about. And thirdly, last Tuesday I was in Dublin, and I attended the launch by Minister Joe O'Brien on the launch of the discussion, or the progressive model of collaboration governance discussion paper. And the PPNs were mentioned within at that discussion as a very vital part of, I suppose, hearing the voice and listening to the people at the grassroots, and bringing, I suppose, bridging the gap between governments and supporting governments and the people on the ground to have an impact on policy. Okay, thank you.
Thanks very much, Kathleen. I know I said you were the last one. We one last hand up. We might just take that, and then I'll finish up. But just to address, Kathleen, what you said again, thank you for putting your hand up and volunteering to be part of the PPN. Agreed, the training piece is vital, and I think it gives a really good context. And I think one of the frustrations that we have is, that there are a lot of people, other PPN stakeholders, not secretariat members, etc., who would really benefit from the training if they took the time to do it. So that's something that we will be pushing for as well, in terms of going forward. Take on board the point around the funding model and the support, additional supports required for PPNs, and the collaborative piece that was launched by the Minister last week, I think was in the Mansion House, was very much brought forward by the CMV sector themselves, and it was a huge piece of work that was done by them in terms of looking at a model of collaboration going forward, and how we do our business and how we produce our policies. I saw Ivan from the wheel on the call earlier on, but I know he was a big part of that work. The other thing to mention in that regard, and of use or information for the PPNs, is that we are planning, this department, as part of its commitment under the CMV 5-year strategy, is having its first civic engagement forum in November as well. So just to keep an eye on our department's website in respect of involvement in that event. I think it's in Crow Park. I'm not sure whether the date is out there at the moment or they've pinned it down, but again, I think it's a really important part or forum for the PPNs to be part of. Maria, I'm gonna hand over to you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Ciara. Just what I have to say, that I find that the Galway PPN are absolutely excellent. We get a very worthwhile newsletter, and really very good. But what I think, it's great to be on the municipal council. It's great to be on national bodies. It's great to be on these things. But what I would ask is, what system have we going forward in place to establish the issues? Or what, somebody mentioned somebody in research there. What have we, how are we going to measure the issues so that the issues at community level can be brought to those, the municipal council, as Vincent said, are brought? I find that I work with the community on a voluntary basis at the moment. And we have, when it comes to community development, we have certainly a very good process in place as regards community development. And there are a lot of supports out there with the Galway Rural Development or whatever. But what we need is support. We have, between community effort and money, I'd say we have put millions into this project at the moment. But it's kind of left with us. We need now some kind of management support to drive this project forward. And that's an issue that I would like to see reflected at PPN level and brought to higher level. That the work that community groups are doing out there is, I say, in our project, I say we're putting an infrastructure in place for the government, which is what's happening in a lot of communities. But it's the next step of managing that infrastructure is the big challenge. And that's why I think that if we had somebody there on research that would actually say, these are the issues that are affecting communities at the moment, and we would like to get answers to them, or we'd like to see them reflected somewhere, I think that unless we take that element, we're going to end up like county councillors going in with a message on a piece of paper now and again. Now, that's very mean of me to say, but that's the way I feel. I feel we have to have proper research on the issues that are affecting community development, and that they are reflected, which to me was the original idea behind PPNs. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Maria. Very important point there. In terms of having the supports to put that to pull together the experiences and the impacts of life in communities and put them in, or provide them provide from structure for them to be researched and captured and fed into national policy. So that's what I'm getting out of your input, and you would like to see that mechanism facilitated as part of the roadmap going forward.
I would, yeah.
Okay. Listen, I think we've hit everybody who had their hand up. We've also taken note of everything in the comments, and we will come back to some of the questions if we haven't addressed them. But I genuinely really value the contributions tonight, people taking their time. I'm actually thinking out loud, and my team will probably kill me after this, but I think as we develop the roadmap, it might be useful to have webinars on very specific issues, targeting those specific issues, and having a real open and honest discussion about the way forward, on digging into specific issues. Some of them have been raised here tonight, around coordination, supports to secretariats, financial piece, relationships, and the value of PPN input into development. And so I've taken a list of them there, but it might be useful just as we develop our thinking that we have maybe some more of these webinars so people can become involved and put their voice forward in respect of how we tackle them as part of the roadmap. So again, look, I think everybody has our contact details in the department. We hope to see and meet many of you in person next week at the PPN conference. The crew here will be there, and feel free to come up and have a chat. And as I said, look, no way as a department do we think we have all the answers here, and we're only going to get there, I think, if we work together and have open and honest discussions, come to some strong structural recommendations in terms of what we need to do to strengthen and support the PPNs going forward. So listen, have a lovely evening, and yeah, as I said, hope to see us all next week. Thanks a million.
Thanks, everyone.